Let's dive into the incredible story of how a private company of merchants, in just about 150 years, managed to take control of an entire subcontinent. It's a wild tale of how commerce spiraled into conquest and of the huge sweeping changes that were unleashed on millions and millions of people. Everything really kicks off right here. What you're looking at is a painting of the moment the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II granted the Diwani to the British East India Company. Now, this wasn't just some simple trade deal, oh no. This was the right to collect all the tax revenue from Bengal, which was one of the richest places on earth at the time. This one document gave the company a staggering amount of financial and administrative power, and it basically set the stage for everything that followed.
So, you have to wonder, how did this even happen, right? How did a bunch of traders who were originally just looking to make a profit end up running a territory of millions? Well, that's the first part of our story.
I mean, this is the big question, isn't it? It sounds almost unbelievable. A corporation, not a government, taking over an empire. The answer, as it turns out, lies in a really clever and, frankly, a pretty ruthless two-part strategy. So the company's strategy was essentially two-pronged. On one side, you had sheer military force. They won decisive victories at battles like Plassey and Buxar, and that really marked the beginning of their land grab. But just as important, if not more so, was the clever political maneuvering, like getting those Diwani rights we just talked about. This was a conquest fought with cannons, for sure, but also with contracts.
Now, as the company's power just exploded, so did its problems. We're talking about massive, widespread corruption. So, back in London, the British Parliament finally decided it was time for them to step in and formalize control. And this is where the rules of the game change all over again. And this is where you can see this huge gap between what they said and what they did. Parliament passed these acts, like the Regulating Act of 1773, and they claimed it was all about cleaning up corruption and that they had zero interest in more conquest. But what actually happened? Well, these acts let the British government take direct control, create a single unified colonial system, and pretty much pave the way for even more expansion.
And you know, the proof is right here on the map. That shaded area? That's British territory in 1765, mostly around Bengal. But by 1805, just 40 years later, it had exploded to include all those dotted areas. So much for no interest in conquest, huh?
With all this new political control, they now had the power to totally reshape the economy. And one specific policy, which was designed to guarantee their revenue, would end up having absolutely devastating consequences that would echo for 100 years.
This fella here is Lord Cornwallis, and in 1793, he's the guy who introduced the Permanent Settlement Act. Now, the British claimed it was going to be great for the farmers, but its effects were, well, the exact opposite.
Okay, so the logic of the act, at least from the British point of view, was pretty simple. They wanted to replace the complicated Mughal tax system with something predictable. So they gave absolute ownership of the land to local landlords called zamindars, and in return, those zamindars had to pay a fixed, unchangeable tax to Britain. This gave the British a stable income and created a whole new class of powerful local allies who were loyal to them. But in doing that, it completely rewired the ancient relationship between the people and the land their families had worked for generations.
And the human cost was just immense. Peasants who for centuries had traditional rights to the land were suddenly turned into tenants with absolutely no security. This led to incredible distress, scarcity, and even famine. The zamindars, on the other hand, became these powerful pillars of British rule. And this is the really crucial takeaway. This one economic policy created this deep, burning anger that would directly fuel decades of rebellion.
And that brings us right to our next chapter. You see, the British weren't just ruling in a vacuum. The people of the subcontinent pushed back, hard, consistently, and fiercely for nearly 100 years. And look, these weren't just a few isolated riots. Starting in the late 1700s, there is this continuous chain of major uprisings. And they were all driven by the same things: economic misery and a powerful desire to throw off foreign rule. Let's just take one leader as an example, Titu Mir. His rebellion is a perfect case study of that dual anger we've been talking about. He organized peasants to fight not only against the British colonial rulers, but also against the exploitative zamindars who the British had empowered. And then you have the Santhal Rebellion, which happened right before the massive uprising of 1857. This was a huge movement. We're talking about an army of 30,000 people armed with axes and poisoned arrows. It started out as a revolt against local moneylenders and landlords, but it very quickly morphed into a powerful,
full-blown anti-British uprising. All this simmering anger, this pressure that had been building for decades, finally just boiled over in 1857. This was the big one, what's now known as India's First War of Independence. And the craziest part is, it began with the sepoys, the company's very own Indian soldiers turning against their employers. From that single spark, the rebellion just spread like wildfire.
So why then? Why 1857? Well, it was a perfect storm. The sepoys were furious about unequal pay, racism, and of course, those infamous rifle cartridges greased with animal fat, which was deeply offensive to both Hindus and Muslims. But it went way beyond the military. You had princes angry about losing their kingdoms, peasants suffering under the permanent settlement, and artisans who were totally ruined by cheap British imports. It was really a nationwide eruption of all these different grievances.
The War of 1857 was eventually and brutally crushed. And after that, the British Crown took direct control from the company. But in the years that followed, a new kind of society began to emerge, and it brought with it both a cultural rebirth and deep new divisions.
So, with British power now consolidated under the Raj, a new Western-educated middle class started to pop up, especially in cities like Calcutta. This sparked what's called the Bengal Renaissance, this amazing blending of Western ideas with Indian traditions that led to an incredible explosion of creativity in literature, art, science, and a new push for social reform.
One of the key figures from this time was Swami Vivekananda. He was this incredible religious and social reformer who traveled the world arguing for a more modern, egalitarian Hinduism and really championing the importance of education for everyone, especially for women.
And then, of course, there was another giant of this period, Rabindranath Tagore. A poet, a playwright, a thinker, his work beautifully blended Indian and Western traditions, and he became the very first non-European to win the Nobel Prize in Literature. He truly embodied the intellectual spirit of this new age.
But even brilliant minds like Tagore saw a fundamental problem with all of this. This incredible cultural boom, well, it was built on a very narrow and pretty unstable foundation.
Here was the critical weakness of the Renaissance. It was incredibly exclusive. For the most part, it was confined to the upper caste Hindu middle class. The participation of Bengali Muslims, of farmers, of the urban poor, it was practically zero. So instead of uniting society, this intellectual flowering actually made the gulf between communities even wider, deepening social and religious divides. These were fractures that would only get deeper over the next century, and really set the stage for future political conflict.
And that leaves us with a final, really crucial question. This era created brilliant thinkers and incredible art, no doubt about it. But at the same time, it baked new divisions into the social fabric of the subcontinent. It was a cultural rebirth, for sure. But we have to ask ourselves, who did it leave behind?